guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a book review for Tempests and Slaughter by Tamora. This is a young adult high fantasy series set in the realm of Tortall. Aaron Draper is a 10-year-old boy who has a powerful gift, which is to say, he has a lot of magic within him. This book follows his time between the ages of about 10 and 15, while he attends the Imperial University and learns how to control his magic. It also follows his friends, Prince Ozorn, who is somewhere around 6th or 7th in line for the throne, and Varys, who is a kitchen witch. Tamora Pierce has written a number of books within the Tortall universe, all of which I've read. This was my last unread book of hers, so now I've officially read everything that she has published. And it's strange for me to review this book, because it is so tied to spoilers for me. The way I think about this book is just inherently full of spoilers, because this is a prequel book. It's about the youth of an adult character in another one of Tamora Pierce's series. So I know where he's going to end up in 15 to 20 years. I know what's going to happen, and I know what's going to happen to all his friends and all the other minor characters in this book. So it's strange to review it in that way and avoid spoilers when I know spoilers for the books in this series that have yet to come out. But it still does work if you haven't read that other series, if you weren't spoiled for it. It'll be a very different reading experience than what I had, but it is a book that's kind of intended both for people who have already been spoiled and for people who may be new. I gave this 4 stars. This was probably my most anticipated read of all time, just because this was announced when I was in high school, when I was a huge Tamora Pierce fan. I adored all her books, and she announced that she was going to do a series on Numair, who is a character in the Immortals series. I was stoked, and I waited about 10 years for this book, and I gave it 4 stars. It was wonderful, and I really loved it. It's probably not my favorite of Tamora Pierce's books, and it's definitely not where I would recommend to start if you're just getting into her, but it's a really wonderful book that I would highly recommend picking up at some point. My biggest issue with this book, possibly the reason that it did get 4 stars from me instead of 5, was that there's not really much plot in this. It's just character development. It's a day in the life as Aaron Draper goes through university and learns about his magic and makes friends and gets up to kind of shenanigans with them. It's very interesting. A great many things happen in the book, but there's not really much of a narrative arc, and I did find myself missing that a bit. I like realistic fiction books that are written in this way, but I think I struggle with that a little bit more when it comes to fantasy books. I expect dramatic, fantastical climaxes when it's fantasy, and then you don't really get that in this book. I do expect that later on in the series, just as I know what has to happen and how it's going to end, but not so much with this book, and I think that made it fall a little flat for me. I kept expecting there to be some kind of plot, some kind of arc, some kind of climax at the end, but there really wasn't. It was just Aaron Draper's life, and that was fine. It was very enjoyable to read. It was very interesting. He led an interesting childhood, and all the characters were really well crafted and just fascinating people. And I loved it. I just think I was missing that little bit of spark that comes from a really good plot, a really good story to pull you along, and not just the characters. But like I said, because of where this book and this series is going to go later on, I'm not really too concerned about that, and I kind of expect the later books in the series to be even better. One thing Tamora Pierce does a fantastic job of is having a full cast of characters. There are so many characters in this book, from very important characters like Aram and his friend Ozorn, to the very minor characters like Tristan or Sarge. And all of them feel like they have fully fleshed out personalities. They're all different people, they have different beliefs, they have different things that they care about and different motivations. And I feel like it comes through in this book. It can be very hard to deal with a large cast of characters, but Tamora Pierce always seems like she does a fantastic job with that. And maybe that's partially because a lot of them are returning characters for me, so I have the other books to go on, but I really enjoyed seeing all of them again. I thought they were wonderful. I think the passage of time was a little bit faster to me. I do like slower books and books that take place over shorter time periods, but just are very slow reads that hit on every single detail, and this covered about 5 years, from when he was 10 to I think about 15. It definitely went by fast. It more of covered like the major events in his life rather than every single day, and that was fine. Like, it was a little hard to follow, but she did include dates at the top of every chapter, so it wasn't really too bad. I just, in general, prefer a slower book, and this is not that, nor is it trying to be that in any way. As a prequel, it was really well done, because we are spoiled for this book. Not everyone, obviously, if you haven't read her other books, but for her fans, this book is thoroughly spoiled for them in every way. I was reading this knowing exactly what was going to happen to even the minor characters in this book. Like, at one point, a new character was introduced, and I was like, oh, hello, I remember you. You get turned into a tree in 15 years. Like, literally. And it's funny to know that. And she writes it knowing that most of her readers are going to be spoiled and are going to know what's going to happen. So she includes all these little tidbits and references to things that are going to happen in the future. Like, she kind of explains how they get to that point and the little quirks in their personality. And it was really enjoyable for that. I think she did a wonderful job writing a book that I was spoiled for. I wasn't really worried about being spoiled. It was just interesting in its own right. Where they're going isn't really the issue. It's kind of how they get there and how they get from being 10-year-old kids to being really screwed up adults who are fighting each other. And I loved it. I loved every second. It went by so fast. I read this book in just a couple of days, and it's a fairly thick book, and I wasn't trying to get through it. I just kept wanting to read more. The only other real critique I have is less of this book in particular and more Tamora Pierce as a whole. I've read all of her books at this point, like literally every book she's published, including the collection of short stories that everyone seems to forget about. And I like them. I like them all. Well, not all of them, but I really do like her work as a whole. But all of her main characters are very good people. They all have very strong morals. They stand up to bullies. They fight for the little guy. They can't stand anyone who's immoral. They're just good people. If they live in a society that has normalized slavery, they're against slavery, even as children, even if their family is pro-slavery. They're just instinctively against it because they know it's wrong. And that's fine for a book, but because she's written so many books, like I feel like she's written 30 books probably at this point, it does get a little old, and I find that I wish her characters had a little more negativity in them in a way, because good people can make interesting characters. All her characters are very well developed and have flaws and everything. But at the end of the day, they're all very good people. And it'd be more interesting if she threw in characters who weren't, or who learned to be good people. And it does get a little boring that they're all just upstanding citizens. But again, that's not really an issue with this book. That's more just her work as a whole. And I really did enjoy this book. I don't think I'd recommend starting with it just because it is a prequel, and while you don't need to have read the other books to read this, I think it does help to have some understanding of the Tortall world in general. I always recommend starting with the Alanna series just because that's her first one. You don't have to read the Immortals specifically for this if you don't want to be spoiled, but just having a little bit of experience in the Tortall world before picking this book up I think would help a lot. Because she doesn't do a ton of world building in this, I think because this is 20 novels into her Tortall universe. So just knowing a little bit of the world and being familiar and comfortable with it, it would really help, I think. But I highly recommend this book. I highly recommend picking up something by Tamora Pierce. She's a wonderful fantasy writer. And this book lived up to my expectations, which is not easy considering I've been anticipating it for 10 years. Let me know down below if you read Tempests and Slaughter and what you thought of it if you did. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.